This is Blackjacked, a podcast about how the civil rights movement went left.
Oh man, I gotta get up. I gotta go. Oh, I gotta go. I gotta go. I gotta go. I gotta get up and go. I gotta go. I gotta go. I gotta get up and go. I gotta get up and leave.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another edition of the Blackjacked podcast. Gonna pick up from last week. One of the things that the civil rights movement always struggled with was responding to terrorism, but specifically the terrorism that impacts black businesses. So we talked about last week business and sort of how the civil rights movement actually undercut black-owned businesses. But the other thing, and one of the primary things that's always undercut black businesses, is terrorism. If you're a white person doing business, you have to worry about profit and loss, capital, those kind of things. Black businesses historically, in addition, worry about terrorism. Now, terrorism can take a lot of different forms, and we sort of understand the basics, right? So take Rosewood, for example, in Florida. 1923, white people go crazy, and they just hunt down black people and kill them. And black people are hiding in the woods, trying to hide out, and they wait out as long as they can. And many of them come out of the woods, and they still get killed. But one of the first things that they did, the whites took the land. They took the land that black people owned. They looted their businesses. They took their property. These people in Rosewood, they were independent. They owned their land. They owned these businesses. But again, terrorism wipes it out overnight, right? So you kind of have that dynamic that white people just don't have in America. Beyond that, we think about, for example, Tulsa. People love to talk about Tulsa, Black Wall Street in 1921. And of course that happened, right? Again, white people go ham. They destroy hundreds of businesses. They burn them to the ground. There are people who say they had little, kind of like the crop duster planes, and just dropped bombs all over. I mean, they went crazy. One of the things that people don't understand about that is it's not just that people destroyed hundreds of businesses and killed hundreds of people. The other thing that happened there is insurance companies, many of them refused to pay out claims to black business owners who, had policies, paid their premiums, and they could not get coverage. But the other big thing that nobody talks about is the highway system. And this is the next form of terrorism that we see against black-owned businesses. It's the highways. A lot of people don't realize, as difficult as it is, Tulsa's Black Wall Street, they did rebuild. It was destroyed, but it was rebuilt. What put the death knell in that community was a highway. And a lot of people don't understand that terrorism evolves. It's just not about people with pitchforks and bombs. Terrorism evolves and it gets more strategic and it gets like a lot more sophisticated. The next iteration of terrorism was the highway and interstate system. And there wasn't a really great answer for that. If you go to the Greenwood district today in Tulsa, there's a big highway that runs through it. That's what killed it. Fortune magazine, I believe in 1954, they called Atlanta's Auburn Avenue the richest Negro street in the world. You had black banks, black insurance companies. What killed it? An interstate. I-75-85, the connector in Atlanta, bisects the neighborhood, through the middle of the neighborhood. It is said that in Nashville, when they built I-40, 80% of the black businesses were destroyed. You see this theme over and over. If you go to Detroit, there was a black business district called Black Bottom, a highway. It destroyed. This is the next act of terrorism. Now, we talked about in episode 4, the NAACP, they're trying to contend with terrorism. They are working on anti-lynching legislation. They see clearly that black people can build, we can do things, but we have got to stop terror. But again, in episode 4, we discussed how the Garland Fund, this white foundation, came along and said, you don't really want to do that. You want to look at education. So let's focus on that. And so the movement never really deals with that terrorism part that's affecting particularly black commerce, black businesses. And here's the next wave, the interstate system. Again, you can go all across the country. You see the same dynamic. If you today go out in a major city and see an interstate, just know very likely a black business district was destroyed to create that. That's just what it was. There wasn't a really great answer for that. And to be fair, what would the answer be? What were civil rights organizations going to do about the federal government putting highways through black communities and black business districts? And then you see that compounded with what we call urban renewal. So we talk about Black Wall Street in Tulsa. There's also Black Wall Street in Durham, North Carolina. Urban renewal killed that one too. So you see this dynamic, interstates, urban renewal, etc. This is the next form of terror attacks. And the movement doesn't really have an answer because the Eisenhower Interstate System, 90% of it was funded by the federal government, 10% by the states. So this is definitely the government committing terror. And there's just not an answer. There's really not a great solution to protect black businesses and black property, frankly. The movement doesn't have an answer, doesn't really have a way to pivot towards that. But as the movement matures, particularly as you get to the late 60s, coming into the 70s, there's the thinking that now it's about politics. It's not about marching in the street. So you see people like Andrew Young, who was a lieutenant of Dr. King. He runs for Congress, right? You see people like the Jesse Jacksons running for office. You see this becomes the thinking that now we have to go from here to there. And the route is through political action and political power. But the problem with the politics is, we talked about this again in last week's episode 9. It doesn't target the concerns of black commerce specifically. But there are some people who try. You really have black mayors trying it, frankly. Good example of that is Mayor Marion Barry in Washington, D.C. He gets elected in D.C., I believe in 1979. I believe. I could be lying. I hope I'm not lying. I'm not looking at it. But I believe it's like 1979. And he gets elected to his first term. He is an alum of SNCC. In episode 3, we talked about Ella Baker, how she helps organize these students. He comes out of SNCC. So Ella Baker influences Marion Barry also. He gets elected mayor. He does an interview with Black Enterprise in 1986, and he says this, and I quote, "For blacks, it is much easier to get political power than it is to get economic power." He also goes on to say this, and I quote, "Blacks in politics should see to it that more economic power is distributed to the black community." And then he says, and I quote, "As one of those with political power, I feel that my job is to see to it that this power is achieved." Now, Barry is not just talking, he actually walks it. One of the things that he does, he requires all of his city agencies to ensure that 35% of the dollar volume of their contracts went to minority firms. 35% of the dollar volume got to go to minority firms. He makes that the rule. You have people like Maynard Jackson in Atlanta. He's, I believe, the first black mayor in the Deep South. He makes that a policy. Again, he wants his agencies to make sure that black firms are getting contracts. And in fact, one of the things that he was legendary for is when they wanted to expand the airport, he made it clear, if black folks don't get a certain percentage, we ain't building nothing. So you have these mayors, the Richard Hatchers in Gary, Indiana. Hatcher was in 1968, Carl Stokes, 68 in Cleveland. Those are the first two. But these black mayors, they realize that white people don't want to live by us. And so they're leaving the cities. Guess what? That gives us political power in these cities, and we can control city politics. But they realize, many of these mayors realize, it's not just about getting elected. This is about money. Where are the dollars going? And so they use their platform, they use their power to make sure that black folks are getting dollars through government contracts. And you see that start to work in some places. You see some effect. Now, it wasn't a fantasy. It wasn't, getting everyone out of poverty, but it was a start. Let's use what we have. We have segregated cities now because, again, whites leave. We can vote. We can control these contracts. We can make sure black people get a piece of the pie. But then you have the next terror attack, because there's a Supreme Court case in 1989 out of Richmond, Virginia. Richmond is another one of these cities that has a lot of black people. Again, we always talk about DC being chocolate city. Again, these are a lot of majority black cities. And these mayors are saying, okay, we need to make sure that black companies because black people are paying taxes. We haven't gotten an equitable share in the past. Let's make sure. Now, again, Marion Barry, he's talking about 35%. Most of these things are like 25%. And so it was in Richmond. They wanted to make sure with the construction contracts, 25% of those dollars would go to black firms. And this is the next terror attack. White people got mad and went to the Supreme Court. They go to the Supreme Court. There's this case and they want to challenge this. And essentially, the argument is this. This is reverse discrimination. Now, think about the irony of that. For generations and generations, black people have been excluded from everything. We couldn't even ride in the front of the bus. We definitely didn't get government contracts. And so you have a few black mayors who get elected primarily in the 70s and even coming into the 80s to say, okay, let's start to address that. Let's have some equity. Let's just make sure 25% in a city that's maybe 60% black, maybe even 70, 25%. This is an oppression. But even that was just intolerable to white folks. And they went to the Supreme Court. And so they have this case in 1989, and the Supreme Court agrees. They say, yeah, this is reverse discrimination. You cannot have these programs that you set aside a percentage to these black firms. This is reverse discrimination, and they make all those programs illegal. And from that time until now, we have not figured out how to do contracting in a way that is equitable, where black people get their fair share in these cities. We have yet to figure that out. We certainly aren't competing on the federal level, but even on the municipal level, you don't see it. This was a terror attack. Again, terrorism evolves. It doesn't stay the same. In 2024, it's not about going into a black business district and throwing rocks. No. In the 1950s and the 1960s, it became, okay, let's build an interstate. Let's do urban renewal. Let's do things to completely disrupt this. And then once you get coming into the 90s, we see some mayors trying to do what they can because we destroyed a lot of businesses like, the Tulsa districts and the Rosewoods. We did that at first. Okay. And then we did the interstates. Whatever was left, we see you trying to rebuild. Let's destroy it one more time. Let's go to the Supreme Court. You're going to use the power of the vote to get contracts. We'll take care of that. That was your next terror attack. Last week, we discussed as the movement is taking off and black businesses are getting involved and they're promoting the movement, they're funding the movement doesn't really do much to sort of reach back and say thank you. And how do we push black commerce now? How do we push for policy and priorities that really help black business? And then the next part of that is, as we see terror attacks, how do we respond? The NAACP wants to respond with anti-lynching. That doesn't happen. You see the interstates, you see urban renewal. There's really not a great response to that. I'm not even sure what people could have done. And just for example, there are people who were successful in diverting interstates from destroying their neighborhoods. There were people who stopped it. So I used to live in the DC area. I lived in Tacoma Park. Tacoma Park is weird because it is a neighborhood in DC, but if you cross the street, it is a city of Maryland, right? And so there are these white women back in the day in Tacoma Park who want to stop this interstate because I-95 is supposed to come from Baltimore through DC, and it's going to come right through Tacoma Park. And they say, oh, whoa, this is my neighborhood. And they are successful in getting it to divert. And that's why DC has a beltway. It goes around the city. Well, they were not going to do that for black people. So there's no win there. And so here we talked about last week, the government really stops enforcing antitrust and anti-monopoly laws. That crushes black businesses. And then we have the one thing that these mayors can do, control city contracts. And there's not an answer to that because it goes to the Supreme Court. And to this day, there is no answer. Whether black people are sitting in the front of the bus or the back of the bus, it is true that without the ability to feed ourselves, produce for ourselves, create an economic base, we're going nowhere. And what we see is that in many ways, the movement really was at a disadvantage. There was no way they could have stopped interstates. But as the movement grows and it begins to progress, it becomes clear that there are no answers to these things. And some of that is that it just maybe was not on people's radar. Again, black people, you have to understand, they're coming from literally lynchings. They're coming from all types of dehumanization and degradation. Maybe they're not thinking about regulatory frameworks for commerce. That may not have been on some people's minds. To the degree that it was, who was going to listen? Again, those white women were able to stop an interstate. Not a lot of listening to black people. But were those even priorities that black leaders were pushing? Not a lot of that. And again, it's understandable, right? They're dealing with survival. They're dealing with just trying to get by day to day. And some of these other things maybe just slip the radar, but we live with the consequences. And so when these black mayors come to power, they think this is overcoming, and it is for them. This is huge. They're coming out of the cotton fields. They're getting elected as mayor. They're doing what they can. But the game is so much bigger because you have a Supreme Court who could say, we're going to drop another bomb. And now what? And so here we are in 2024. There's still no solutions. But are we even asking those questions, and are we even demanding those things as political priorities?
I gotta go. I gotta get up and go. I gotta go. I gotta go. I gotta get up and go. I gotta get up and leave. I gotta get up and go. I gotta go. I gotta get up and go. They waiting on me when I walk out the door. They counting on me to get ready to blow. Too many people saying that I'm the hero. Too many people looking up to me. Can't let them down, not an option for me. Don't even matter if you rocking with me. I touch down even if you ain't blocking for me. No BS and no negativity. Only dealing with positive energy. Yeah, it's haters and doubters surrounding me. I don't pay them no man, they ain't stopping me. Like Brady and Jordan on top of me. I'm MVP in every category. My confidence grows every day that I rise. Gotta get up and go, keep my eye on the prize. I gotta go, manifesting on my hopes and dreams. I gotta go, yo, I'm strategizing like I'm coaching the team. I got places to go, I got people to see, I got things to do. Yo, I'm through with surviving, it's time to start living, I don't know about you. That's what I see for myself, speak over my life, I got riches and wealth. Take it in stride one day at a time, no malice inside, I'm nothing but blessed.